Have you ever wondered if it's worth going to writing events, and is it worth your money, and is it really worth your time? And what if you are sort of further along in your career and then you might be speculating about, is it worth creating some of my own events? That's what we're going to talk about here today. If you're a fantasy author, then you've come to the right place. My name is Jesper, and together with Autumn, we've published more than 20 books. And it is our aim to help you in your writing and marketing endeavors. So today I have been joined by somebody else, and actually it's the guys from the Career Author podcast. I listen to their podcast every week, and I will put the link in the description field below for their podcast so that you can go and listen to it if you want. But the reason that I wanted them on here to cover this topic is because I know that they have talked about it before, and that they also have both of the perspectives on this thing. So they both joined conventions by themselves as a participant, but they have also and are creating events for other authors themselves. So we wanted to try to cover both angles here, and welcome to the Am Writing Fantasy channel, Jay and Zach.
Yeah, thanks, Jesper. We're really happy to be here.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thanks a lot. And well, I guess we can sort of just jump right into it. I know you guys have participated. If we start with sort of the participation angle, and I know you guys have gone through different events just as participants where you have not been the organizer of it, but I wonder if you could sort of share a bit about, is it worth the time and the money that it takes to go to these events? And if you do go to these events, how should you go about it to make sure that you actually get anything out of it? Because it is, at least I think, quite a both expenditure of time, but also as introvert authors, maybe it's not the coolest thing that we can think of to do. So is it worth it?
Yeah, I think it's totally worth it. I can say that without hesitation. I'm thinking back on some of the live events I've done more recently. So I did the Indie Author Lab that was put on by Publishers Weekly last year. I did Podcast Movement, I think in 2016, 2017, which is sort of like a big convention. I did StoryGrid certified training and a StoryGrid weekend with Sean Coyne last year and a couple of years ago. So yeah, participation I think is really important in those. And I think what's most important is that it's not necessarily what you think you're going to get. It's going to be what happens when you're there that you can't plan for, you can't anticipate. Things like conversations with other authors over a cup of coffee that leads to a further discussion, that leads to a possible project, or you meet someone who happens to know somebody else and it's a good connection that way. And I hesitate to use the term networking because especially for introverts, that makes our skin crawl. It's got sort of this really dirty connotation, but it really isn't. It's not networking in the sleazy internet marketer sense. It's more about making connections with other people and really allowing yourself to be in the moment and to absorb what's happening. Certainly the speakers and the content is important, and I think people will probably only sign up for events that they believe are going to help further their career. But I don't think that's the main reason for going to a live event. I really believe it's the interaction with the other participants, possibly the people who are putting on the event, and then all the potential that comes from that. And even if I don't meet someone and I don't have a very concrete outcome from that meeting, there's always a skill or a strategy or a new way of looking at things that comes out of those events that doesn't happen for me online.
Yeah, and I know, especially from what you've shared in the past as well, Jay, that you get quite exhausted from these in-person events things. So how do you go about it? If you are like an author who are very introvert and don't really like seeing other people, do you sort of mentally pitch yourself up to, okay, I need to talk to 3 people today, or how do you do it?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I mean, it's a very broad generalization that creatives are introverts. Not all creatives are introverts, but I anecdotally, in my experience, I found most of the writers I deal with are introverted or towards the introversion scale of the Myers-Briggs. And there's really sort of 2 ways an introvert can approach a live event to make it more manageable. The first one is exactly, Jesper, what you mentioned, which is to kind of set a little, gamify it for yourself and just say, okay, today at this event, I'm going to talk to at least 2 people I don't know. I'm going to introduce myself to 2 people or 1 person. Like, it doesn't matter the number, right? It's that you are creating a little incentive for yourself that will put you in the right mindset and sort of open, you're sort of opening your mind to meeting other people. But then on the flip side, it's really important to both at the event and after the event to have time to decompress. And I think this is where introverts really have to do this for themselves, because it's not usually built into the events. You need time within the day of the event to go and sit by yourself for 30 minutes, or go read a book, or go journal, or just go and not talk to anybody. Like, that has to be built into the day. And then I think it's also good, and I think this applies for extroverts as well. Once you get home from the event, you need time to decompress as well. I think it's really hard to just kind of jump right back into your daily grind. You need time to process. You need time to recharge and get some of that energy back, because for introverts, being in those crowded environments is not impossible. And it's not that we hate it. That's a misconception. It's just very draining on your energy, and you need to be able to do that. And sort of at a secondary level, I think it's really important, both leading up to, during, and after the event, that you are paying very close attention to your biological needs, making sure you're getting enough sleep, you're eating properly, you're exercising if possible, because there's a tendency at these events to kind of go off the rails and eat and drink and do things that you wouldn't do at home. I call it living like a teenager. And so if you're not a teenager, that's going to take its toll too. So I think all of that, taking that sort of comprehensive approach, can really make not only the experience great, but make the least amount of disruption in your day.
I'll also add real quick, I'm definitely, Jay will straight up call me an extrovert. I don't know if I'd go that far. I definitely have introvert tendencies, but I'm definitely more extroverted than he is and a lot of other authors. But to me, one thing I've noticed being at these events though too is that, it's not the same thing as going to like a cocktail party or like a work Christmas party or something. There's a lot of other people in the room who are like you. And I think that knowing that comfort and that you're not the only introvert, most of the room is going to be introverted. From what I've seen, I think that really helps open up people talk. And I know with our bigger events, specifically our conferences, we try to, we do like the round tables where people are kind of forced to sit together, but it's not like there's never really been any kind of uncomfortable thing from it. And then we have our genre dinners where people are put together by their genre. So like we're kind of encouraging people to kind of break out of that a little bit, but not in like a funky, speed dating type of way or something like that. That's like really uncomfortable, So that's just kind of my perspective from being a little less introvert, or much less introvert, I guess you'd say.
Yeah. I think from my own experience when I've been to sort of conferences or events or stuff like that, it's not as hard to strike up the conversations as one might think. You're just sitting at the table, and as long as you sort of smile and are open to people, then usually you can start talking. But where I think it's a bit difficult, and where I'm curious what you guys say about this, because the aftermath of it, okay, so you got home, you talked to 5 people, but how and why should you get in contact with them again? That part is a bit mystical to me, How are you supposed to do that? Okay, I can just send an email to somebody, hey, it was great seeing you at that event, but it's a bit, I don't know.
I think that's a good first step. And a lot of times you don't really know how or when or if that's going to happen. I remember I went to podcast movement when it was in Chicago with Brian Cohen from the Somewhere Book Show. And he's very outgoing and extroverted. And he had no problem walking up and talking to a lot of people. And I think that was good for me. And I think if you tend to be more introverted and you have more of an extroverted buddy you can bring with you, I think you can play off each other's strengths in that way. And so I was able to kind of tag along with Brian. And then I was really good at sort of looking at all of the offerings and saying, okay, well, why don't we look at this one and sort of thinking about this one? And that was not something Brian was really good at. So we kind of balanced that out. And then what I did was, when I came home, of all the people I met, I did exactly what you said. I sent an email and just said, hey, it was really nice to meet you at Podcast Movement. If there's anything I can ever help you with, just reach out. And I kind of gave myself permission to leave it at that. And I thought, I'm going to do that. It's sort of it's courteous. it's kind. And if something's meant to come from that, I'll hear back from them. And some people I did, and some people I didn't. And you just never know. I think the big thing that we always preach is that if you start a relationship by giving as opposed to asking, it's always better that way. So even following up with a thank you from a live event, I think if you're just saying, hey, thanks a lot. If there's anything I can ever do for you, just let me know. And then leave it at that. I think that's a good way to approach it, not feeling that pressure to sort of work all those contacts that you just got, all those business cards you collected. I don't think you necessarily have to force yourself to, make connections with those people that aren't natural.
Is there any specific events that is better? I mean, I'm going to put you a bit on the spot here, so it's okay if you don't know, but I'm just thinking that some of the people who are watching this video or listening to this podcast might be people who are also pursuing more traditional publishing route. So are there, in your view, certain places that are better than other if anybody wants to go there?
Yeah, it's perfect timing because as we're recording this, I'm about 3 weeks away from heading to New York City for Thriller Fest for the first time. So I think, if your listeners are not familiar, Thriller Fest is the annual gathering for the thriller writers, and that's where they have all their awards, and there's Pitch Fest, and agents are there. In fact, I'm going to Pitch Fest. I'm going to be pitching a project to several agents. And I think every sort of top-level genre has that annual gathering. Like for the Horror Writers Association, they have StokerCon.
I think RWA probably has something.
RWA has a big gathering. The Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America have an annual gathering. So I think if you are looking for an agent, or if you're more interested in sort of the traditional publishing world, those are the events that you want to attend, and those are the big ones. And they're somewhat affordable. Like they're not out of reach. I think for a few $100s per ticket, you can go to any one of those, and I think that would be a great way for people to get to know what that industry is like.
So I guess we can conclude that it's definitely worth going to these events, and you need to put a bit of your extrovert hat on and then go through the doors and try to build a bit of relations. But I'm wondering then if we sort of jump into the time machine here and say then we fast forward a couple of years, and now the people listening or watching the video, they have sort of grown a certain level or gotten to a certain level in their career. And they're starting thinking, okay, maybe it would be cool to actually organize some events on my own and thus maybe use it as supplementary income to my book selling or whatever it may be. Maybe it would be worth if you guys just spent like a minute talking a bit about what you guys are doing and who you are. And so just to set the scene a bit for talking about what kind of events you are arranging and how you're going about it and what you're thinking about and so forth.
Yeah, we the whole thing started kind of funny for us. I mean, it really came out of, we ended up doing our Authors on a Train is kind of our event that really spawned it. And that came out of us going on a train trip with Lindsay Broker and Joanna Penn and spending a week writing a novella. Like we rode on a train, planned a book out, and then spent a week in New Orleans, Louisiana, writing a whole novella together. And Jay and I were sitting outside one night having a burger before we went to a concert while we were in New Orleans, and we just kind of were like, man, like why couldn't we do this with other people? This is like a really cool niche event type of thing that really we don't see anyone else doing stuff like this. Like you see people doing writers retreats where they'll go like rent a cabin and everyone will work on their own stuff, and you see the conferences and stuff, but you really don't see these like smaller, really unique things. Like who else was taking people on a train? And then it's a really weird thing. And that's really what started it. And it spawned, it kind of snowballed into the smaller, like the world building type events where we'll go and we'll pick a unique place and go build a world out together. And then of course we're still doing Authors on a Train. Then we have our bigger conference as well, which is the Career Author Summit, formerly the Somewhere Book Show Summit. So yeah, that's kind of the main stuff that we have going on, and we can obviously, as the conversation goes, dive a little deeper into each one of those.
Yeah, I would add too that there's sort of an intermediary step for someone who's thinking about this, and I think it's very
this is really good one.
I think it's really great to be thinking about diversifying your revenue streams as an author. I would highly encourage people who feel like either organizing or putting on one of these events sounds like something they'd like to do. I think that you should definitely do it. Don't listen to there's too many or there's too many people doing it. I don't buy into that. I think there's always room for more voices, new experiences. But I think between being an attendee and then running or hosting, there's this other space that I would recommend people explore, which is start talking or offering to speak at other events that you're not running. I think it's really important to not only refine your public speaking skills and your ability to present, because as you know, with a podcast, whether you're on a podcast or on a stage, you are performing. It's a performance, and it takes a certain level of skill and practice. It's not the same as having a casual conversation with somebody. So I think you need to practice getting in front of people. And the way I did it is I started offering to do talks for free for my local library system. And I would go in and I would hold these little workshops and I would do these talks. And I did that for years. And I was a classroom teacher before that. So I had sort of the presentation mode refined. But doing those presentations sort of gave me the understanding of, okay, number one, what do people want? And number two, if that's what they want, how can I provide it? Or how can I find someone who can provide it? So I think there is this middle ground where you really have to kind of fine tune your chops. And one of the ways you can do that, going back to our previous point, is you could reach out to people who are organizing events and offer to speak for free and say, hey, I'm getting, experience in speaking. I love your event. I've been following you. I would love to present for free to your audience if that's okay with you. And, some people are going to ignore you and some people won't. But I think getting your feet wet and really getting experience presenting, especially on a stage live in front of people, would be really important before you kind of go all the way to that point where you're going to be the organizer of the event.
I think another step you could even take is, and I think this is kind of going to depend on where you live, but I almost feel like running some kind of really small event locally could be really good. And even if you don't charge anything, go rent a room at like a local co-working space or something. And obviously, if you're probably going to want to be in a city where there's like going to be a lot of riders that could come, but there's a whole other level of complexity of planning an event and risk when you're talking about and for instance, in September, we're going to Seattle, and we live in Cleveland and Nashville, and Seattle is a 5 or 6 hour plane ride for each of us. So to plan an event in Seattle and not live there is there's a lot of complexity around that. And, Jay and I both have a background playing music, and I know me personally, I know he has some, I used to plan a festival and stuff, a small music festival. And so I have some event planning background, and I mean, there's a lot of little logistical things that you may not think about whenever you're planning an event. And, we're still learning as we go and learn along the way. But I think that doing something locally small, maybe you try to get 10, 15 people or something to come show up, and you do a lecture type thing, or maybe you guys do a world building. I don't know, but I think that can kind of help you start to see kind of the logistics of putting something together and getting people to show up as well, which is kind of a step ahead of having the library organize something, you showing up and speaking, which I also think that's a great way to get started on that too.
Yeah, and it is a great point around getting a bit of practice with people, speaking in front of people, because even for an introvert, it's certainly doable, but you sort of need to get used to it a bit, and then you can make yourself do it, so to speak, almost. But I think it's a good point to sort of work your way up to it and do some of those smaller events for a start, if that's what you want to go. But at the same time, I also know that it's pretty important for you guys that the event doesn't grow too big. So I'm wondering, how do you balance this side of, okay, you have some cost into it because you have to rent a place and probably get some food and drink and whatnot. And then at the same time, if you don't have enough people coming, then I guess either you can have a very, very high ticket price, which I don't think you guys are doing either, unless I'm mistaken, or you can have a ton of people at a lower price. But how do you balance it out? Because if you're just doing it for fun, then it's fine. But if you're doing it as a sort of supplementary income, then you need to earn a bit from it, right? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's really important to be completely transparent and honest and say that anytime you're organizing an event, you're taking a risk.
Yeah.
Financially, mostly financially, but you're risking your reputation as well. I mean, I don't think we're at this point anymore, but I remember we had conversations of like, what if we roll out an event and no one shows up or no one's interested? Like, there's a cost that's involved there at a certain point. But more importantly, the events, for Authors on a Train, we're renting a mansion in San Francisco. Well, we had to put 50% down on that before we put up the landing page. And for the Career Author Summit, we had to secure the conference center before we put the landing page up. And so part of that is you need some savings. You need to have some money set aside that you're willing to risk. I mean, you can mitigate your risk, but at the end of the day, anytime you're putting money up before you're selling tickets, you are taking a risk. So I think it's important to recognize that, and we've been willing to do that, and we've been successful. We haven't lost a ton of money doing it, and we've made money in most cases. But you do need to have money willing to sort of put up and to secure those. As far as the events themselves are concerned, our wheelhouse, our specialty is really these small, sort of intimate world building gatherings. And so Authors on a Train and Sci-Fi Seattle and Vampires in New Orleans, these are events where we're only taking a dozen people. So we know that we don't need to have $100 in Facebook ads a day running to drive traffic to that landing page, because we're going to sell them out. It's only 12 people. And we charge enough that we're going to make some money, but it's not so exorbitant that people can't afford it. So that's sort of the one style of event that we really like doing. The Career Author Summit, we kind of fell into our lap. It wasn't something we had planned on doing. The Somewhere Book Show, Brian Cohen decided he didn't want to do that summit any longer. And we had such positive energy and momentum for that event. We didn't just want to let it go. And so Zach and I went to Jim Kukral and said, all right, well, Brian doesn't want to do this anymore. And it was all good. In fact, Brian's going to be speaking at the Career Author Summit. But we said, what if we continue it? We'll rebrand it as the Career Author. But we made a very hard, definitive decision, very public decision, and said, we're not growing it. It's at 120.
115, 120 is about the max.
Yeah, that's about the number of seats we're going to sell. And we're not growing it past that. And when those sell out, those sell out.
And we could.
But
we're not going to.
Yeah, I mean, we're very close to having that sold out now, and it's 11 months away. So and that's not a slight against events that grow larger, become larger, but we find in our own experience that once you go above 115, 120 people, it starts to feel more like a trade show and less like a conference or a workshop. And that's just not what we do. We like to be able to walk around and interact with everyone. We like people to have the opportunity to meet all the other people there. And once you go north of 125, it's hard to do that.
Mm.
I think going back to kind of swinging back to your original question too is, it's very risky, and Jay will tell you, like, what we kind of laugh because we joke that when we're coming up with these things, Jay always starts with yes, and I always start with no. So Jay comes to me with these super ambitious ideas, and I'm always like, no, we got to pare it down, and we end up somewhere in the middle, and it really works out. But I think that not getting too ambitious and trying to knock it out of the park so hard the first time, when you're not really sure what all the costs are going to be and stuff, is really important. So don't, you obviously want to put on a good event, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to take all your attendees to the fanciest restaurant and have the fanciest venue. And we've made that mistake. I mean, we had one of our events, we're going to try to make it a little bit bigger, and we rented a bigger type. We rented a whole theater, and we did a lot of different things. And that event, as awesome as it was and as fun as we ended up having on it, ended up losing money for us. So, and it's because we got too ambitious, and we learned a lot from that though, and realized, we'd rather deliver these really cool experiences. The problem was that we were trying to get more people than we really should have. And we really realized then, like, for our smaller world building events, like 15 people max is kind of like, that's really where our sweet spot is. And with that, we can still make enough money to, like, be at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or at the Mopop Museum and see, like, we can still do or rent a mansion. We can still do this really cool stuff and still have room for us to make money as well.
One element is around the venue that you are reserving or paying for, but the other part is also what type of event you're running. And by that, I mean, if you are running something like you're talking about here, like a world building event where it doesn't take much prep in the way that, okay, maybe you have some initial idea for a world, but people then come to the event and basically the work is done there in the event. But if you have more like a presentation type of event, either you would need to run the same presentations every time so that you don't have to prep too much, because if you do want to create a new presentation every time, at the end of the day, that is time away from writing. And unless you are really earning money on that event, if you're just covering your cost or earning $1,000, my question would be, is that really worth it?
I think that's a very legitimate question. I think the answer is going to be really dependent on the individual situation. Zach and I need to make enough money to make it worth our while. We know between us what that is, and that's got to cover our own cost of getting there. The cost of not writing during that time, I think that's another cost that factors into it. And I think it depends on the event. So if you're talking about something like the Career Author Summit, preparing to present at that, a lot of the work comes ahead of time. And then you present, and then it's kind of over. The world building is kind of the opposite of that. So there's not a ton that we do leading up to it, but then once it's over, we publish an anthology. And Zach's right now is going through all the stuff from Rockapock in Cleveland, and that's a full-on anthology publication, revision, editing.
It's a lot of work.
So that's work that we're not quote unquote getting paid for. That was part of the ticket for the event. So that's just stuff that we're obligated to do that we enjoy doing. So I think it really comes down to the person as far as like what type of event do you want to put on, what do you hope to get out of it, and what sort of resources do you have to spend on it, and that's both time and money.
And I think it is important to mention too that there's two of us.
Yeah.
Which if that's not obvious, but for people who don't know, we do these events together, but we also write fiction together. So even when our fiction production doesn't necessarily have to stop, because Jay might be working on a presentation, but I might be working on our fiction. So I do think that's important to bring up but that's not to say that one person still couldn't manage this stuff on their own and still run their fiction business and do events. There's nothing that says that by any means. But I just think that's important to bring up for this conversation too, though. So.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and I certainly don't think that this is anything, the starting out author should really worry about or try to do. But even if you're not collaborating with somebody else, if you're a bit further down your career path, you might have a virtual assistant who can help booking stuff and whatnot. So that's
absolutely
a possibility, of course.
You're probably going to need some help to do an event. There's no doubt.
Yeah.
Depending on the size and scope, what you're trying to do, like you're probably going to need some help. But like you said, you can definitely hire people out to help you with stuff. So,
is there anything else we should cover around organizing events? Is there anything that I should have asked you that I didn't?
I mean, as far as organizing an event goes, I think really the big takeaway, what Zach mentioned is if you're really interested, do something very small and local for free. And that's the best way to get a feel for a lot of this. Everything from logistics to the type of people you want there, to the presentations or the workshops that you want to do. And maybe depending on where you live and who's near you, you can just invite a few of your friends and just say, hey, come for free. Let's all do this together. I'll sort of run it, and I'd love to just get your feedback on it. And I think starting small and starting locally is probably the best way to do it, because the last thing you want to do is to think planning something like the Career Author Summit sounds awesome and you'd love to do that, and then you start to do it and realize it's not something you enjoy or it's something that you don't want to spend time on, and then you're kind of stuck. So I think if you start small, then you're going to have a much better a much better idea for yourself as to whether you can do something more grandiose in the future.
I think that's very good advice, and it's always good to get some advice to somebody who has actually done it, rather than people speculating on what might be good or bad. So I very much appreciate that.
Sure,
and,
absolutely.
I did mention the Career Author podcast in the beginning, and I will put a link to that. So if you're watching on YouTube, it's going to be right below this video. And if you're on the podcast, just go to the show notes. But is there anything else, guys, where you want to mention where people can find you, or is it just the Career Author podcast you want to point people?
Yeah, I mean, everything's over at thecareerauthor.com. You can get the podcast there. All our events are there, so if you're interested in attending one of our events, we're right now we are all our 2019 stuff. Well, the only thing we have left is Sci-Fi Seattle. It's sold out. Our 2020 stuff is almost sold out. So we have the Career Author Summit in Nashville, Tennessee. That's in May of 2020. We've got some great speakers. We'll be there. We've got Joanna Penn, Lindsay Baroker, Brian Cohen, Jim Kukral, Mark Leslie Lefebvre, Honore Quarter. We've got some really good speakers lined up for that, and we're getting really close to being sold out for that. As of this recording, I don't know what it'll be when you air, but I think we have like maybe 15, 20 tickets left.
Yeah, probably around 15 tickets.
So we've got that going on. We have Authors on a Train, California Dreamin' is what we're calling that. So we'll be taking a train from Los Angeles, California, up to San Francisco with a group of authors, and we'll be staying in a mansion for a few days, and we're gonna build out an anthology together, write stories, collaborate. That's a collaboration event. That has like 1 or 2 tickets available as of right now. And then we also have Vampires of New Orleans, which will be taking place Halloween weekend, which if anyone who's never been to New Orleans, that's like the best time to go to New Orleans. The weather's really good. And there's so much cool stuff that happens there during Halloween. And we got some really cool stuff lined up. We're going to be doing while we're there, but then we're going to be writing vampire stories, publishing an anthology. And we don't have many tickets left for that either, I don't think. So, and again, so this is all for 2020. So you can check all that stuff out. I mean, if you're someone, again, who's interested in May writing events, it's got all the stuff there. You can kind of see what we're doing, and, maybe that'll spark some ideas for you as well. So, yeah, but everything's at thecareerauthor.com.
All right, yeah, and I don't think there's anybody within this fantasy author audience here who doesn't like vampires. The only thing you need is you're missing the dragons, so you need to put them in somehow. But
we'll get there eventually.
2021, we'll bring dragons.
Cool.
Maybe we'll come closer to where you live, and we'll get a castle somewhere and do dragons.
Yeah, that would be cool. Exactly. All right. Thanks a lot for coming on to Am Writing Fantasy, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having us. We appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. And to you out there, see you next Monday.